After we talk about ontological positions, we are going to go another philosophical stance about epistemology on the contrasting views. So epistemology is to do with how we make an inquiry to the world. So it's a study of the nature of knowledge and the way of inquiry into physical world or social world. So how do we know what we know? Okay, sometimes that we know, but people ask about how do you get to that point? Sometimes it could be to do with I know the surprise, and the people say, but how do you get to know the surprise instead of what is a surprise? So people emphasizing the way of doing things and the way we get into the road to help us to understand the shape of the reality, and that construct two views, because it could be how we attach ourselves or how much we detach ourselves. So are we attach ourselves in that kind of world and we observe from it, or we detach from the world and detach ourselves from it in a situation, and then we will be able to find out the reality. So that's a different way. So in terms of the contrasting theoretical perspective about epistemology, and they have two perspectives. One is positivism. The other is called social constructionism, or sometimes we just use constructionism. So the positivism is the key idea about positivism is that the social world exists externally. So this social world, the property of social world, should be measured through an objective approach. However, in constructionism, the reality depends on the people rather than by an objective and external factor. So it's mostly to appreciate the way people make sense of their experience. Okay, so here one is talk about we need to be objective. We probably need to detach, because the social world exists externally. The other one is about determined by people. So it's not about objectivity, about external world, because we need to appreciate how people make sense of the world. So they have a different philosophical stance in terms of being attached or detached, and in objective or subjective here. So philosophical assumption of positivism. So there are kind of 8 key elements involved. The first 4 elements is about independence and value freedom, causality, and hypothesis and deduction, which we mentioned here many times. Independence, it means the observer of that reality must be independent, okay? They are independent what is being observed. The second one is the value of freedom. So the choice of what to study, how to study can be determined by the criteria rather by human belief and interest. So certain evaluation, certain value, how they do it, they can see, okay, there are criteria we need to set up. Some people use a lab study, so they set up the kind of the culture, so they can manipulate and they say that's real because it's pure, so we can observe as external factor, then we can know what we know. And then causality, there's always something to identify the causal relationship. So there's some kind of social behavior. We can say, okay, there's a kind of independent factor and then causal dependent factor. So that's try to identify there's some kind of causality. So hypothesis and deduction, I'm not going to elaborate here, but this is a kind of positivism. They generally go for hypothesis. They come with an idea, And then with the past data, so they use a lot of data to show that the past study has been suggest so. Therefore, I hypothesize I'm going to deduct. So I'm going to using a different approach, which is like a lot of data. So I will be able to do deduction instead of induction approach. The last four parts in terms of philosophical assumption of positivism is about operationalization. So basically the concept need to be defined in a way enable the fact can be measured quantitatively. So how they option in the operationalization process is about I'm going to using quantitative method. That things is numbers, based on numbers I can analyze, so there's no human factor, is I collect from the numbers 1 to 10 or everything, I can perform the statistics, there's no human influence, there's no people try to tell me to affect my judgment. And the other is a reduction, so we can see problem as a whole, so we can reduce to a simple form. So that's why we mentioned about a causal factor. So you can see A lead to B, and how you identify A lead to B, because you use a reduction. So they can be generalized. So they can move from specific to generalized. So they can apply like a basic research. They can apply to a different situation. So they can be generalized. And they can cross-sectional analysis, which can be making comparison of variation across samples. So cross-sectional analysis, it could be study by a different approach. So sometimes the people want to have a longitudinal study. So they can collect the data now and 1 month later, and then they do the test and see whether the result is the same. So or they test it 1 year later and see the result is the same. So the approach can be generalized because the results are identical. So our operationalization is quantitative and reduced in a simple way, and we still generalize, and it's still through the different time period, and we still can identify the result the same. So we can therefore make a conclusion about it. So for the epistemology and positivism versus constructionism, they have a simple way of showing. How about observer position? So observer in the positivism, they are independent. But in the constructionism, is part of what is being observed. So the observer is involved in the group they observe. The human interest, basically for positivism, well, my interest is irrelevant. So I just conduct what is necessary. But the human interest is a main driver of the science about what people like to tell you, like to know. So that's some kind of human interest involved. And so explanation is to do with how can we demonstrate the causality in the positivism. But the constructionism is basically try to understand what are related fields, so we can see the linkage, not about causal, but there are some kind of correlation or some kind of connection with each other. Those are related, and we can separate them as an individual part to say which one is a causal factor here. So research process, one is about hypothesis and deduction. The other is about you have a collect data, so you can induce as a so-called induction approach. So in the social constructionism is about induction. And about the concept between two, one is about things can be defined, and we need to define it in terms of criteria. So when you talk about how much you like it, scale 1 to 10. How much the painful level, scale 1 to 10. But the social constructionism isn't about numbers. It's not how they measure. It's about what's the perspective of people, what they say. And then all kind of information gathered in combination of multiple factors, they can be considered a form of concept. And the unit analysis, it can reduce. So in a simple term, so you can have a different variable. But in terms of the analysis, it could be complicated because you want to incorporate all situations you have collected. So you need to see a holistic view. One is about how you generalize. So one is about statistic, and the other is about theoretical abstraction. So how can we gather from information and try to find the linkage and what's the construction and what is a structure within the construct and how is interlinked and what is the connection between them, and is there any possible chance we can see that could be some kind of outcome that we can make a conclusion in that situation. But that kind of conclusion, rather as a kind of a simplified conclusion, the conclusion could be a kind of proposal we are going to make to let people to do further tests. So here is about sample, is about large sample and can select randomly. The opposite side about the constructionism is about a small number or cases. We just need to choose particular people which is relevant to that situation, and those people will be able to provide multiple perspectives to help us identify the complexity of a situation. So in the kind of a simple approach, you can say positivism like a hardcore, and then the constructionism is like a soft, like a fix, and then the positivism constructionism, there could be a way of doing it because we can do both, and then like a fix, so from fix, core, and that can be apricot. So how I'm going to illustrate further explanation here. For the research outputs, we use a fruit, explain it, because the hard acron is about using realist ontology, which is linked to the positivist epistemology. It's turned to produce a quantitative study, and then we can use a numerical data collection so we can analyze. So all we care, numbers. So this is to do with a realist ontology, and then we can say, okay, everything is to do with numbers. I'm very objective. I just evaluate. No one, my sample collection, my data, they won't be affected by me. Where I stand, how I look at them, doesn't matter. The other one is called fixed, so it's like a soft. So nominalist. So we're back to the nominalism. Nominalist ontology connect to the constructionist epistemology. So which means that they suggest a qualitative approach to collect data so we can analyze. So qualitative data we could be able to collect from people's perspective. We interview them, and then we can get some phenomena. So sometimes people like to interview CEO, the director. They have a rich experience about what is reality. So some people want to talk about business success or merger acquisition. So they're looking for the merger case, and then looking for all the CEO or all the negotiator involved, and they can look in from their experience how they see the world about success of merger and the challenge of merger and all kind of perspective relate to merger, and then they can bring a bigger picture through the constructionism. And this could be from the nominalist, because remember, the nominalist, everyone is particular. There's no universal way of explaining things because everything could be unique. And the facts, there's no facts. It depends how we see, how we say it, what we say, and everyone say things differently. And how can we gather everyone together to find some commonness there? So the apricot approach, which is a critical realist, they basically have a mixed method. So they have a qualitative here, like a constructionism. They have quantitative approach, like using numbers as a positivism. They create a so-called triangulation. So they have a triangulation through a different approach. So they have a constructionism approach. So they probably interview people, try to see the different reality of people, what they say, and gather those information to produce a kind of proposition. And with that kind of proposition, to using numerical analysis and to provide a generalized answer and then you can simplify the answer with the causal reality. So that become a triangulation process. And that could be from the inductive approach to deductive approach. And that would be considered a more complicated approach. So in terms of methodological implication of different epistemology here, so in terms of realism, is about positivism. And the internal realism is about positivism. Relativism is about constructionism. And nominalism is about constructionism. But it's just a different level. One is strong, one is okay, the other is stronger. So we have a different direction in terms of positivism to the constructionism. So in terms of what's the game, in terms of methodology, in the realism, they care about what they discovered. They create hypotheses. They're using experiment. Okay, so they can create a kind of a very strict environment. There's no complication. So like a medical research, they're using lab study, using the mouse, and they create a mouse fit into the environment they need. So there's no other kind of a complication there. And all they get is about data. So they can verify and they can confirm what the theory say or disconfirm. So it means they're against it. And the data can't be proved. So internal realism is to do with expose, and in terms of what is kind of proposition there. So they use a large survey, they have multiple cases, so they have many numbers, but some words. So sometimes they may have an interview, some words, so the word can be repetitive there. They can look in for correlation, they can look in for regression. So there's testing theory, and they still can generalize the outcome. Then we go further, the other two, relativism, and they are going for the constructionism as a epistemology. So they are looking for convergence through the question forms, so asking questions. And that question could be using multiple case studies or using the survey as a question to ask people. All they care about what's the words and some number there. Maybe there's always a little bit number, but those number is not the crucial element to identify the outcome. It's more about what people say, and that can be do some triangulation and kind of comparison. They still can create some theory or something new to the theory to generate the theory. The last part is nominalism, which is about invention, and the nominalism as a particular, so they make a lot of critics because that situation is different there because they can explain and because they engage in that kind of reality, so they can be able to see the reality from their own world. So they have using discourse analysis and using their experience while they are involved. So they have a sense-making understanding. What they do is they can bring their insight and action when they are involved in that reality. So there are strength and weakness among all these approach. So basically, we can say the strong positivism, the strength, it works. It always provides some compelling conclusion. However, it's become hard as a weakness. It's hard to implement social experience because the strong positivism, if you involve with social experience, we can control, like I mentioned earlier, like an emotion or feeling or certain thing, you would affect the outcome. So it becomes difficult to focus on social experiments in terms of a strong positivism. And when we're looking for positivism, the strength, it can provide a wide coverage. It's not as strong as this realism, but at least it still can be fast, because you can analyze quickly with a statistic, economical, and also can provide justification and suggest policy. But however, they can be not flexible because they focus on numbers. They are not good for the process because sometimes you have to have a complete data, and the theory generation could be there, but it's sometimes you just prove, confirm or reject. And there's maybe sometimes harder to generate new theory, but it can certainly provide a theoretical implication is about what else they are looking at. In terms of constructivism, constructionism, the strength is you can accept the value of multiple data source. So you can still have a generalizability, but you can have some kind of a sample you collect, including some kind of potential outcome there. But how to access those samples, like access CEO, may be difficult because not everyone can accommodate to your time, and maybe there's some cultural difference, maybe organizational cultural difference. There could be a national cultural difference, and how they perceive, how they explain, it could be under certain conditions. So it could be difficult to reconcile discrepancies. And the social constructivism, the strength is good to operational wise, it's good for process, because you can understand the meaning, how it evolve, and how do you see when you collect data is not artificial, because not like numbers. Sometimes you ask people how happy you are, scale 1 to 10, and some people say I don't understand what's scale 1 to 10. But sometimes in terms of structure constructionism, when you collect data, they sometimes explaining the happiness. They give you a lot of example, the condition, the environment, and they can give you a lot of comparison in terms of past, current situation. It's very particular example, so there's nothing artificial there. But it can be very time consuming, because when you go for the field study and you want to understand how certain tribe, in terms of making business, you need to live in the tribunal life and see how they interact with the chief, how they're dealing with different tribe, and how to talk about arrange the meeting, etc. That could be time consuming, and when you come with analysis, you have so many things to analyze, so you don't know where to do it, and you become difficult to find the credibility, because you have a lot of bias there, because you are deeply involved. So therefore, not all the methodologies are considered perfect. There are some strengths and some weakness, but it really depends on what kind of study you intend to do, and then therefore you can choose what kind of approach you can do, and then that could be the best methodology you can choose for your research.